everybody. Welcome to the Hardboiled return of Ms. Tree panel. My name's Andrew Sumner. I'm one of the directors at Titan Entertainment, and I'm very happy indeed to introduce the gentleman to my left, who will need no introduction to you, but I'm going to introduce him anyway. So, what can I tell you about this incredibly prolific individual, a man whose work I've loved since 1981, but he's been writing since well before that. For comics, he created The Road to Perdition in 1998, turned into a great film by Sam Mendes in 2002. He took over the writing of Dick Tracy from Chester Gould. With Terry Beatty, he created Wild Dog for DC in 1987, personal favourite of mine, and now featured in the Arrow universe on television, a slightly different incarnation. Another character we'll talk about in a second. For books, he writes the Quarry series, the Nolan series, the Mallory series, the Nathan Heller series, great series, the Elliot, yes, right on it, thank you. The Elliot Ness series, at least 19 movie novelizations, a slew of TV novelizations, including the CSI novels, and he is the literary executor, of course, of the Mickey Spillane estate, and we're very, very proud to partner with Max on some of his endeavours there, publishing and completing the whole range of Spillane manuscripts, including the ongoing Mike Hammer series that we publish. It's a great pleasure to be involved with.
No, I'm exhausted.
Hey, and guess what? Guess what? I haven't even finished. Check this out. He's won an Ink Pot Award. He's won 2 Shamus Awards. The Westerns are awesome. He was credited as, he was given the Grandmaster status by the Mystery Writers of America in 2017.
The secret is mediocrity. It really is.
But today, we are here to talk about a character that debuted in Eclipse magazine in 1981. And I bought this magazine from Chapter 1 Records in Liverpool, England, in 1981, on the day it came into town. And the character we're about to talk about leapt off the page. And I'm, of course, talking about comics premier, hard-boiled, private detective, Ms. Michael Tree. So before we get to Ms. Tree, let's have some applause.
Go on and multiply.
Don't know if you ever remember the old Vegas introductions for Sammy Davis Jr., but to paraphrase those, please let's give a round of applause for the 3 biggest names in hard-boiled literature. Max Allan Collins.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm so tired now, I don't even know if I can go on. But we talked about Mike Hammer last year.
We did indeed. A subject very close to my heart as it is to yours, Max.
And I had today some interviews, thanks to Imogen. Thank you, Imogen.
Imogen in the house.
With people some of whom were too young to know who Mike Hammer is, not was, because he's very much an is right now. And so it becomes hard to explain that the origin of Ms. Tree was all tied up with Mike Hammer, with the notion of kind of flipping the basic premise, because one of the things about Hammer that is really striking that Spillane never got credit for was that the secretary, the sort of traditional, beautiful secretary that all private eyes have, was also a partner in the business, a private detective herself, and carried a .32 in her purse, and there was an unrequited love that got quieted a little bit later. But my notion was, well, what if the tough private eyes secretary married him, and on the night of the marriage, basically their wedding night, on their honeymoon, he was murdered, and then that became her. She took over the agency, and it became her first case. And that was really all I had in mind, and to do that one story for Dean Mullaney, because Dean Mullaney was doing this magazine called Eclipse, and he had invited some people who were pretty much superstars in the medium. Yeah. But he happened to be a Dick Tracy fan, and he had seen a little strip Terry Beatty and I did called Mike Missed, which was a minute mystery strip that we did for the Chicago Reader.
Yeah.
And he liked that. He actually collected it in a little comic book. And so he came to me and said, would you and Terry do a detective strip for Eclipse? And I felt very fortunate because a lot of them, there's some big names in there. Marshall Rogers was in there. Gulacy was in there. And Don McGregor was writing, and some people that were very well known at the time and still are. So it was a big surprise when Ms. Tree was the feature that seemed to resonate the most strongly, and we were the only one that was spun off into its own comic book. And it began in, as you say, in the early 80s, and it lasted into the 90s, over 50 issues. And it became the longest running Private Eye comic book of all time, at least so far. I mean, that's actually kind of faint praise because most of them would only run like 6 to 12 issues.
Nathaniel Dust, 4 issues.
I remember Sarge Steele, which was created by one of Mickey's best friends, Joe Gill. And then the great Johnny Dynamite, Pete Maurices, who is being collected.
Yeah,
and
that's a great book. And Johnny Double, Born for Trouble.
Yes, there's just not very many of them, though. They didn't last very long, and we hung in there, partly because we hit right at the beginning of the independent comics movement. Calling it a craze is wrong, because nobody ever really sold enough to get rich on that. But and it was a month-to-month thing. I mean, it was how many orders were there? Oh, good, we get to do another issue next month. It was that much. That was absolutely the way we were able to do it. It was every month we were on the bubble, as they say in TV world.
And as you said, you were on that bubble for a long time. It's 50 issues across 4 publishers, right?
Yes, it was initially Eclipse. They did the first 10, and then Aardvark Vanaheim became the first and maybe only thing that Dave Sim ever published besides Cerebus. Yeah. And then he and his wife split up, and as I say, she got custody of Miss Tree, and she started Renegade Comics, and that's where we did our longest run.
That was the one, wasn't it?
And then thanks to Mike Gold, a good friend of mine and an editor at DC at the time, he really wanted to see Miss Tree go to DC Comics, which would automatically guarantee it a wider audience. And we did 10 issues there, and the format was basically to do around 56-page graphic novella every month, and I really felt that was a wonderful format for us, and was where I think we did our best work.
Yeah, no, I really like the long form quarterly issues. I thought they were great. Was that around the time? Would that dovetail about the time you were working on Batman? Is it the same kind of thing?
No, I'm trying to remember. I tried to put that out of my memory.
Yeah.
I take a perverse pride in being the most hated Batman author of all time.
Well, I mean,
next to maybe Bob Kane.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no.
I can't rise to that level.
Yeah.
I'll tell you a quick Bob Kane. Can I tell you a quick Bob Kane story? Okay, so when I get Dick Tracy, I get a call from Bob Kane, and I'm just like, oh my God, Bob Kane called me. And he says, would you like to have something of mine that I could draw for your office wall? And I'm like, oh, fantastic. So he sends me this absolutely amateurish, horrific piece of art and a $500 bill. Which defines graciousness in a whole new way. Now, I returned it to him and didn't pay him, but now I wish I'd kept it because I could have probably sold that horrible piece of art for about $2,500.
How fantastic! That's brilliant. Bob Kane never disappoints.
No. But I was with what happened with Batman. Basically, was I had a revolving door of artists, and I did several 2-part stories where they had 2 different artists working on it, and there was no art shared. So characters a character would be fat in this one and skinny in that one, and it just was awful. And I had been set up with a guy who was really quite good, but he missed his deadlines and only did 1 issue.
Okay.
So it was a debacle, but they actually kind of liked me at DC, and I ended up doing the first story of the Batman comic strip with Marshall Rogers, which
Fantastic.
was a fabulous thing. I went to try to buy a piece of art from it and was told it was like that I needed to come up with something like $12,000, and I decided to pass on it.
Yeah.
My wife will be pleased to hear. And
yes.
but and I eventually did a graphic novel I'm very proud of that was a translation of a very loose translation because I was turned loose, but Kia Asamiya did it, and my son, who is a Japanese translator, helped me. And because we had actually had the books, and I had a rough, terrible translation to work from, so he gave me a better translation. And they flipped. They don't do that now. They preserve the manga format. But I was literally in the bathroom holding it up to the mirror because they were going to flip it, and I had to see how the panels would play.
Fantastic.
It was crazy, but I was not well received. My Robin was the one that, although I wasn't writing it at the time, but it was my Robin who got killed on the phone by the fans.
Yeah, right. But I always thought I loved your Jason Todd origin. It's the one that made sense to me, and it's still canon now.
Well, there are several funny things about Batman. One was that it's my origin, which the fans didn't like, which was that Robin stole
boosting the tires off the
Batmobile, but that made it into the cartoon series. And then the other thing was that, again, I was despised, but Toys R Us at that time came in to DC Comics and said, Batman's very hot right now because this is when the Michael Keaton movie was out. It had been out recently, and so they wanted to look at the recent runs of Batman to do some, to put them in, just to put them in bags and sell kids. Well, here's 3 Batman comics, and so they looked at everything that had been done over a period of about 5 years, including all the Frank Miller written stuff and all this stuff that everybody loved. All they picked was my stuff, and I got incredible royalties off of those despised comics. So royalties are the best revenge.
Absolutely. Revenge is sweet.
Speaking of revenge.
Yes, indeed. So to flip back onto the origin of Mystery, we were talking before, Max, and I dug out my old Clips comics and had a read of the first 6 issues. And what I was struck by was how hard-boiled even that first sequence of tales actually is, how hard-boiled the dialogue is, and there was something specific you wanted to ask you. So if Mystery is a Felder analog and Mike Tree is a Mike Hammer analog.
Sure, yeah.
It struck me that, and it hadn't struck me as strongly at the time, probably because at that point I hadn't read what I'm about to reference, but.
And Joe Friday was your father.
Yeah, right. Well, I was going to ask you about this. Yeah, this is wonderful, and I want to get into that in a second. But Mike Tree, it seems to me visually, is very much patterned after the Ed Robbins version.
Yes, definitely.
Hammer. He's almost identical.
Absolutely, that was. And what we did with Ms. Tree, which is, I hope, interesting, is that I remember Terry and I sitting at Terry Beatty, the co-creator, and we talked about what Ms. Tree would look like. And of course, Velda had classically a page boy, and so it came up that, maybe we should do Betty Page.
Yeah.
And we talked about that, and I think Terry may even have done a few drawings, and then we both came to, I can't take credit because I think it was mutual. We said, it's just too on the nose. It's just too on the nose. And we want her to be, even though it's a over-the-top melodrama, we want her to be more real. We're not going to do a baby doll. We're not going to do a sexy babe. I like sexy babes. Yeah. I'm married to sexy babe, as a matter of fact. And but that wasn't what was. She's shaking her head. But that wasn't what was appropriate. And so we went with. She's rather large. She's not skinny. Yeah. She's got some shape, but she's definitely not a kind of a pinup model. And shortly after we made this decision, my friend Dave Stevens created The Rocketeer, used Betty Page, and got a Walt Disney movie. and brilliant material. But, sometimes you can't just take the easy path, because it seemed pandering to us, and we really wanted her to be a hero. A hero. But another decision we made was not to have her be, well, I guess Modesty Blaise, and I love Modesty Blaise, but Modesty Blaise is better than any man.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to go with, that to me is a faintly sexist stereotype. It's like in order to have a female protagonist in a tough story, she has to be a super woman.
Yeah.
So I wanted her to be just as tough as Mike Hammer, and just as flawed, just as psychotic. So ultimately, if you take the Velda analog again, it's more like after Mike Hammer gets killed, she becomes Mike Hammer.
Yeah.
And of course, that was built in that we had, his name was Michael and her name was Michael, that they shared the same first name. And then there's a son who's also named Michael. So I'm really lazy about coming up with different names for these characters.
I think you get a real sense of Ms. Tree's mortality throughout the stories, and she really goes through the ringer in the course of pursuing revenge, her justice, her point. And I was always impressed by the fact that she doesn't, say you've got the late 60s Mike Sikowski version of Wonder Woman, who's essentially Emma Peel, right?
Yeah.
It's not that, she is very much sometimes overmatched by some of these big physical thugs. She always triumphs, but she, I think that the best evocation of that I've seen in a film, for example, is in True Romance. Where you have the climactic fight with the heroine in the movie, and with the names are escaping me, the dude from The Sopranos. Yeah, and she goes through everything to defeat him. If anybody knows the reference I'm talking about, and that seems to me like sometimes in some of those big fight scenes in Mystery, she's really working hard to overcome.
Yeah, I think it's like in Torn Curtain, which is not a great Hitchcock film, there's that wonderful scene, though, where Paul Newman shows how really hard it is. Actually, Hitchcock does, but Paul Newman has a lot of trouble killing a guy.
Yeah.
It's really, really hard work. And, Spillane, I think the biggest influence Spillane had on me probably was in the visceralness of the fight scenes. That people lose teeth, that there's blood, that that they're really nasty and they're really hard, and they're not fun. Hollywood really made bar fights look fun a lot of the time. And if you've ever actually been in a bar fight, they're not fun.
Yeah, they're awful.
They're just awful.
And emotionally ravaging, actually.
Yes, yeah.
It's like knocking people out is actually in reality nowhere near as easy as it appears to be in the movies. But
if you really knock them out, you got a 50-50 shot of killing them.
Yes, exactly. So to flip back to get into what we're doing with the ongoing mystery series from Titan. One Mean Mother, the first collection, starts at a very, very specific place.
It does.
And so could you get into the thinking behind that, and why we're starting, where we're starting, and why you are starting this collection?
Well, I'll try to get a little bit on the good side of my publisher, who's sitting in the audience, by bragging about the fact that I was given...
Very, very well-dressed gentleman, by the way, sat here. Excellent choice of black polo shirt. Everybody dresses like this at Tyson. There's 250 people walking around with these on. Yeah.
Well, it's just that a lot of publishers would have insisted that I start at the beginning, because that, I know this does not apply to anyone in this room, but some comics fans are a little bit anal retentive, okay? And they want it in the right order. But for me, I felt first of all that we'd done our best work at DC, that it was the culmination.
Yeah.
And we had done a kind of a soft reboot, so that because we knew people would be coming into this cycle who had never been there before, that our audience would be larger. So it was an easy place for people to get into the story. And also the DC stuff was in color, which a lot of our stuff was not in full color. And so, and then there's also a general theory in the world of comics that when you do when you do a cycle of a complete run of something, the early ones sell the best. So I thought, well, I'd like people to see that. I want them to see my best work, so I'm going to give them that, and then we'll get them on board. They'll be on my side, and they'll have the fun of backing up, and that will be pretty chronological then. Yeah. Sometimes we have stories that are out of the continuity, and we kind of, putting the volumes together, would use them so that the volumes would have a relatively equal length. But the story, once you get to volume 3, 4, and 5, you'll be able to follow the continuity in a very linear way.
Yeah. And can you just give us, without spoiling the tales for those who've not read them for a while or not read them at all, just the sort of the narrative shape of this first collection, what's actually going on in Michael True's life?
Well, one of the things that I wanted to do was, because we had these 10 issues at DC, and I kind of, roughly speaking, alternated an ongoing continuity with somewhat self-contained stories. And so I wanted to take those 5 stories that together, these 5 novellas that together would be a big, long mystery novel. It's sort of like, I have to put myself in this class, but Dashiell Hammett doing, The Glass Key, or Red Harvest in particular, and doing 3 parts, and each one, the Dane Curse is the one that really, each one works individually, but when you put them together, it's one big story, because he was doing them in Black Mask magazine on a serialized basis. So I thought, if we can lead off with an actual graphic novel, they call everything a graphic novel now, but to have something that really is a graphic novel, the grand mystery graphic novel, I thought that would be the best place to start. And it does deal with a rather tragic love story in her life, and her unique way of dealing with betrayal by a man, and then also that she becomes a mother. And it's called One Mean Mother for a reason. So, and again, this does reflect that we did things with Ms. Tree that were unusual. I mean, most private eyes don't get pregnant, for one thing. All right. A lot of Mike Hammer never got pregnant. Philip Marlowe never got pregnant. Sam Spade never got pregnant. I mean, it's a long list.
Yeah, no, I get that. And, but it just makes for a fascinating tale, to see because she goes through a lot of changes in this first collection, I think. Yeah.
Well, she does, and yet I think she stays in character pretty much throughout. The most startling thing to me in rereading the material is how little it seems to have dated. All you'd have to do to make this contemporary is drop cell phones in, basically, and probably mentions of social media, because there's a line early on where this individual is compared to that he was the answer to Donald Trump, and Ms. Tree says, "I didn't know Donald Trump was a question." Now, I wrote that in like 1991, I think, that line, and so it's interesting. And then, unfortunately, it's fortunate for us, but unfortunately, these topics are still with us. There's still homophobia. There's still date rape. There's still abortion clinics being bombed. There's, everything, date rape, all of these.
All of that stuff is very much a real thing.
And one thing I didn't mention about the birth of Ms. Tree was that it largely came out of that I was doing Dick Tracy, and I was doing modern crimes, and and I like to do topics like video piracy, stuff that had never been done in Dick Tracy, but they wouldn't let me touch certain topics, and so these were kind of lined up, the things that the Chicago Tribune Syndicate said, you can't do this, I want to do this, you can't do that, and I have 4 or 5 of these, and then when Dean Mullaney called, wanted to do Mystery as a comic book. I'm like, well, I can deal with all this stuff. And so I stayed very contemporary, kind of ironic since the rest of my career is doing historical detective fiction.
Yeah.
So, you know, I was, in those years, I think I was more known for doing topical stuff. But if I ever did another Mystery, I just might keep her in the 80s. She seems very 80s in a cool way to me, 80s, early 90s.
Yeah.
Maybe it's the big shoulder pads.
Yeah. I'm sure that's a part of it. I think it really captures that time. You get a real sense of the time while it's contemporaneous at the same time. The dialogue, I don't think has aged at all. It feels very, very fresh and very in your face, actually.
Don't you notice that when you see there are movies from the 80s I look at now, and that just seems sort of like okay to me, but because they're shot in New York in 1984, and you go, oh man, and this is very cool.
Yeah, right, you're a time capsule. In fact, something you and I have talked about a lot is the 82 version of I, the Jury, which very much captures New York in 1982. It's a snapshot of New York that doesn't exist anymore. And there are many reasons to love that film, I think.
Yeah, I love that film. There's a line where Chambers basically gives Mike Hammer Soldier Fortune magazine, and Hammer says, I appreciate this, the job leads.
Yeah, absolutely. That's just before or after Chambers gives him the try not to kill too many people today.
Yes.
Yeah. But I mean, you've seen it. It's only when I watched it recently on the Blu-ray that I realised everything I loved about that film. There's also these great vistas of New York, as when you sat inside Hammer's office and you're looking out onto Times Square or wherever it is. Yeah.
Well, now that we look back on Hardboiled fiction, I mean that is so, you know, there is a picture of, you know, the 20s in Hammett, the 40s in Chandler, the 50s in Spillane, and you know, so on. One of the things, not one of my favorites, Robert B. Parker, but he very much captured his era.
Yes,
no
absolutely.
question about it. That is and I don't think that's a private eye writer trying to be a sociologist. I think they're just using the world around them to react to it.
Yeah, no, I think you make that.
You know, we did several stories about runaways in this, and serial killing. Yeah. When Ms. Tree kills the serial killer, and the liberal. Yes. That's what I would probably say. And he was a sick man, and she says he's all better now. And I like that kind of stuff. Yeah. Not in real life, but I like it in my stories.
And that's the great joy of her dialogue, I think, and it delivers time and time again.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
No, it really does. There's a great bit, and I'm paraphrasing. It's your dialogue, and I'm just remembering from reading the first story where ultimately the bad guy is manoeuvred into going down, and she says something along the lines of, I'm not going to kill you now. I'm going to take justice. I'm going to let justice take its course, and you're going to go down into prison as a form of camp. All the people you put away, they'll be there waiting for you. They're waiting to rape and torture you and all that good stuff. There we go.
No, she's pretty cold.
She's pretty full on. Yeah.
Yes, pretty cold. But the other thing is that, and I'm very proud of the fact that we let the stories grow out of stories, and so you do have her going to prison. Yeah. You do have her being institutionalized. You do have her on medication to make her not behave the way she's supposed to behave. And one of my favorite things is when everybody around her, some of the same people who would criticize her and try to kind of tone her down, are like, you need to act more like Ms. Tree, and she's on her medication. So she, I love that the people are realizing that in their world they actually need this woman, and they need her not to be tamed. She needs to be who she is.
And that's what I love about her. I think it's the uncompromising nature of her character, and she owns who she is. I think.
Well, and I'm very proud of the fact that we were part of, and actually, I think it's overstating to say we initiated it, but the fact that Sarah Pretsky, good pal of mine, creates V.I. Warshawski, and Kinsey Mahone is a creation of the late, great Sue Grafton, all after Ms. Tree.
Yeah.
Both of whom were basically fans of Ms. Tree and let me know how much they liked Ms. Tree. Now, I'm not saying they were not imitating me, and they probably would have done that anyway. I think there was something in the air, because that happens. If I understand the word zeitgeist, I think that's kind of what you're talking about. And there was that whole period where the female private eyes really dominated hard-boiled fiction, and it was just a whole new thing, and we were part of that. The other thing that wasn't around was crime comics.
Yes, of course.
There weren't any, but us.
Yeah,
well, Batman was a crime comic, but he was in a union suit, and we were doing something, and it's not like we're more realistic, but I always felt, and I still do feel like, comics were divided into superhero and, can I say artsy-fartsy?
Yeah.
Okay. And I like a lot of that stuff. And you could include underground comics in that too, which I was a huge, and still am, fan of underground comics. But in the middle, where most of the world lives, where most of the movies, most of the TV, most of the novels weren't being represented. There weren't Western comics. But that's all because of our friend Dr. Muerta, because the soldiers came back from World War II reading comics of all genres. And only by the skin of their teeth did a few superhero comics hang on and then be able to blossom into what DC did with, Showcase, and what Stan Lee did with doing those comics that if I had just saved those first issues that I bought off the stands, I wouldn't have to be sitting here talking to you.
I had a very similar experience because my grandfather.
Please don't tell me he burned them.
Oh no, not at all. My grandfather served with an American unit in World War II, and he was an anti-aircraft gunner, and he loved surfing with an American regiment. It's because the regiment in question was decimated on D-Day, and he had to be moved over because all their anti-aircraft guys had perished. So he served with them for the duration of the war. And in his American rations, basically at that point, English rations were essentially one step away from cardboard.
Yeah.
Whereas the American rations, he got at the end of each day, he got 2 cigarettes, a bar of chocolate, and 2 comic books. And he came back from the war with a huge love of America. American culture and American comic books.
Well,
and all those guys had a Grammy and all that.
It's no coincidence that Mickey Spillane was a comic book writer.
Right.
And so this, my Nate Heller character began as a failed comic strip, just like Mike Hammer began as a failed comic book. Yeah. I mean, there's some parallels there. There are a lot of things that brought Mickey and me together as friends, and there were a lot of things very different about us. Our politics were wildly different. We never talked about it. We didn't care. He loved my work. I loved his work. I became kind of his literary son, I think, and I am so grateful to you guys at Titan for what we've been loosely calling the Spillane Legacy Project. Because for odd reasons, Mickey left a lot of unfinished material behind, and we've discussed this, and we won't go into it. But I mean, we're at the point where I'm going to go home and start the book now, that will be doubling the number of existing Mike Hammer books. We will now have, and all of them have substantial material by Mickey in them. Yeah. And so I'm very proud of that, because there's nobody out there finding 13 Philip Marlowe novels that Chandler started to finish. There's only those 5 Hammett books. I mean, so this is pretty significant.
I mean, and I speak for all of us, I speak for Nick and myself and the whole team. It's a privilege to be able to help you facilitate that and complete it. It's great work, and the fact that exists and you're able to do it, that's mind-blowing.
My great fear is that you'll find out how much fun I have doing it, and think and know just how little you would have to pay me to do this. Oh, did I actually say that? I thought I was thinking that.
I was going to touch upon Hammer actually, and but before I do, just back onto mystery for a second. Can you just elaborate on the Joe Friday connection just a bit more? What you
Well,
think
that was just kind of fun because
I've always loved that.
I'm a big Dragnet fan. I think that Jack Webb was the Orson Welles of television, and he's been somewhat turned into a joke.
Pete Kelly's Blues, for example, great film.
Oh well, I mean, he was his own worst enemy because when he went back and did Dragnet again, he did a pretty lazy version of it, and sometimes it was unintentional self-parody, which we all, I hope I don't do that till I'm like 100 or 110, but I'm sure I will. But the work, some of it is largely lost, but the stuff he did with the black and white stuff, I mean, he defined a more serious kind of television. Television didn't look like that before him. He was an auteur. He directed every episode, and he did a lot of the writing. And his understated, I always say it was understated dialogue, oftentimes with just shouting visuals. It'd be like an egg frying filling your, and he knew he had a screen about this big to fill, so he'd fill it with faces. He'd fill it with interesting faces. And I love his work. Big fan. And so just as we gave a tribute to Mickey, I thought it would be fun to imply that he might be her father.
I think it's such a...
I think we had the 714 badge in one issue. If I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, it's such a beautiful touch, I think.
But as I've revealed, I'm a fan, and I'm of a generation of writers. I kind of feel like we're the first generation of writers who did come out of being fans. I mean, a lot of the people who, Hammett wrote out of having been an actual detective,
Yeah.
Chandler was somebody with literary, ideas and pretensions who saw that this was something where this was someplace he could go and would be able to excel. The competition wasn't great. Mickey couldn't get his comic book sold, so none of these guys were not reading themselves and saying, I'm going to do that. But I'm of that generation that read this stuff and took them like vitamins, and got excited about it. It's like where maybe some kids were saying they wanted to be a cop when they grew up. We wanted to be the person who wrote the stories about cops. I never wanted to be Dick Tracy. I wanted to be Chester Gould, and for a while I was.
Yeah, fantastic. So true. I mean, it must have been such a kick to be working on that strip when you did, and to have that opportunity back.
Well, probably the challenge of my career has been, and I have to really say that Chester Gould had a lot to do with this. My wife and I were sitting in his kitchen in his home and his wife was getting us some cookies and tea and stuff, and I was doing a good job, and he knew I was doing a good job, but he looked at me and he said, "You need to do other things too." He said, "You will never be, I will always be the Dick Tracy guy." And it wasn't arrogant. It was like, you will never be the Dick Tracy guy. You will always be the guy who followed me. Yeah. So, and I will never be Mickey Spillane. So the challenge of the career has been to make enough of a mark on my own so that I don't just become, this guy is this guy who fanishly follows these people around that he admired. And I'm okay with that as long as they let them read Nate Heller and tell me I'm not my own guy. Wow. Let them read Quarry and tell me that anybody's ever done anything like that. And so I'm very proud of that stuff. And you guys have done a lot for me with. Hard Case Crime is a Titan imprint.
Yes, indeed.
And while I worked for Charles R. Dye there, I know. I know what rolls downhill. Wait a minute, that's a bad expression, I guess. I know who's down. I know who's at the bottom. It's me.
Well, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to, like I said, it's a pleasure to just help with it. To just be part of it. And
well, you've been a very big booster, Andrew. You've been a big booster,
Thank
and
you.
it's really nice to. And it's actually kind of unusual to feel like I'm sorry to kiss up so much. I really am. It's obnoxious, but to feel
there's a stream of $20 notes going under the table. That's what having this conversation.
they have to be pounds to be notes.
Yeah.
And I'd rather have pounds.
Yeah.
I'd rather have pounds. They're worth more.
Yeah. Just slightly.
Not as much more as
they
used to be, but the idea that when the stuff is being appreciated on that end. I mean, and I have other editors at other houses who appreciate my work, but you also have people who it's just it's just another work day for them. They don't have any enthusiasm about what you're doing, or they don't understand what you're doing. I've had some difficulties with publishers who are looking at what maybe a reviewer says and then telling you, well, this reviewer thinks don't like what you're doing here. Why don't you not do that anymore?
Yeah.
Really? I mean, that's nonsense. You have to have some respect for the storyteller. Yeah. The storyteller has respect for the people on the other end. So.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a big part of what Nick's built at Titan is he's all about the respect for the artist. I think
it's really great.
It's the way forward. The something about actually the kind of inside baseball of putting these collections together is one of the things that will happen is the various prose short stories will be included as we go on.
I had done a handful of the prose short stories. One odd thing is that the only piece of fiction I've ever been nominated for an Edgar for, I've been nominated for a bunch of Edgars, but it's been for nonfiction, or it's been for this, or it's been for that. But I was nominated for a mystery short story. And it was one of the people on the committee, because the writers, they go to writers, these committees are formed from within the organization. Richard S. Prather was on that committee, and I live to have him like my work. Somebody I grew up reading, Shel Scott. Some of you know that name, some of you don't. But and I always felt that's why I got nominated, was because he was old school, and it's.
He could see you carrying that.
Yeah,
he's on that torch a lot.
Exactly, and. So we have, and then I'd also done a handful of stories for collections that were done years ago, just because you like to put something new sometimes in that to give people, to make them buy it, so because they're completists, right? You know how comic book people are. So we've put those in the back, and I'm doing introductions, and so I think these are. This has a good feel as a volume. I've had some people wish that we would put on our letters columns, which were pretty notorious.
I mean, they were something else.
They were pretty wild. They kind of anticipated the internet, and I'm not sure I'm proud of that. Yeah. But there was a lot of bickering. And
they were a kind of battleground at times.
They were, because again, I would do some SWAC with an exclamation, because it's sealed with a kiss. Yeah. And a lot of people would write in on two sides of issues that I think I mentioned to you that I did the abortion clinic bombing story, and then Miss Tree had an abortion, and she had some regrets, and so I had people, I had both sides of that issue really mad at me, and like, well, what do you believe, and I said, well, it's, why don't you sort it out? I mean, it's. I always felt like if I could get them coming at me from both sides, I'd kind of done it right.
Right on. I wish we still had the connectivity of some of those letter pages.
Some of those are, I mean, they go beyond political incorrectness into some of the people that wrote in were, and I never censored anybody. And it was one of the liveliest letter columns there were.
Yeah, right on. As we're getting coming towards the end of our time here, have we got any questions? Yes, the well-dressed gentleman in the Hawaiian shirt, Mr. Ed Cato.
Hi. Max, we love your writing. Everyone here loves your writing, and this series in particular. But I think Ms. Tree was very special, and that your partner Terry Beatty's art was wonderful, almost like crept up on you. You didn't expect it to be so strong, and I think especially the covers and during those Renegade days.
You did some great ones.
Were fantastic and so different. Never a set thing, close-ups, silly scenes, dramatic scenes. Can you speak a little bit about the craft of Ms. Tree as a comic as opposed to like Nate Heller prose?
Well, we were operating in an era where comics, in my opinion, had gotten kind of out of hand, where it was all about visuals and they did not have, to my way of thinking, good storytelling. Your eye was not being drawn through the page in the way that it should be. And so one of the very first things I said to Terry was, I want this to be an exercise in coherence. So let's look at Johnny Craig primarily, and then let's look at Eisner, and let's look at Kniff, and although I think it's Caniff actually, but all of us say Kniff. So I come from comic strips. That was my enthusiasm. I love Tracy and Lil Abner is I think the greatest comic strip of all time. I don't think his creator was the greatest human being of all time, but I do think it was the greatest comic strip of all time. And so that was where we came from. And he got a lot of heat for that, There was a lot of criticism that he was not very good because it was because you could understand it apparently. and I think he got better and better as it went along. But there's a charm about his earliest stuff.
I agree. I think there is a real charm about it anyway.
And we were coming out of people like Ray Gatto. Does anybody know who Ray Gatto was? And so we were coming out of a comic strip sensibility, I think, much more than a comic book sensibility. And he's very underrated to this day. And the irony is, there's several ironies about our careers. We both did Batman. We never did it together. And even as we were doing other projects. And he is now doing a syndicated comic strip. He does Rex Morgan M.D. and he writes it. I kind of think he may have had a pretty good writing teacher. If the name escapes me. But and that's
biggest names in Hardboiled.
That has been the thing that has stood in the way of doing more Ms. Tree is we're both so busy, and that because Nick was after us right after Road to Perdition came out, was after us to do this, but we were insisting that we wanted to do a graphic novel that then the collections would flow out of, but we never had time. Now we may still someday have time, but. I don't really think I want to do Ms. Tree with anybody but Terry Beatty. It is a comic strip kind of thing. That's the team. That's who did the comic strip. Terry Beatty and Max Collins.
Have we got one more question, ladies and gentlemen? Yeah. Yes.
Hi.
When you're doing comic work, are you doing scripts or storyboards and thumbnails, and do you give Terry the reference?
I only did once. I did a story Marvel style, which is the artist goes first from your outline, and then you fill it in. I did that with Joe Staten when Joe Staten did and Terry did a crossover between Mike Mauser and Ms. Tree. It was called The PIs.
It's an awesome book.
Yeah,
you're right.
Hated it. I didn't hate the book.
Yeah.
I hated the experience. I called it dubbing the Godzilla movie. And so I always write full script, and I always, and it always amuses me. I know I did a little movie once that called well, it's actually the second movie. It was Mommy's Day, and there's a chase sequence at the end, and. Well, I was nominated for writing in the Iowa Motion Picture Awards, one of the most prestigious awards that you can get. And they showed the clip, and it was all just running with no dialogue. And I said, I wrote every word of that. But you write, you do kind of write the pictures. Now, I have trouble with some artists, and that's one of the things that Terry is, Terry was extremely good about that. And he was good too, because if he didn't do exactly what I did, he knew that he would give me what would satisfy the needs of what I said I had wanted to do. So that's why he was we were such a good fit. Thank you very, very much. Thank you, sir.
Oh, thank you, Max. Max Allan Collins. Thank you. So,
Show them the book.
Oh yeah, this is exactly what I was about to do. So this is tremendously important. We have 2 advanced copies here for people to have a look at. Here
the bidding opens now.
It's fantastic stuff. We have a signing at the Titan booth tomorrow with Max at 11 o'clock, and we have some mystery art cards for Max to sign. We also have copies of the Quarry graphic novel. We also have copies of the Mike Hammer graphic novel,
Which I understand are very good.
fantastic. It's fantastic. I don't know who put them together, but he really knows what he's doing.
Not
He
bad.
knows his hardboiled. So that's 11 o'clock. That's the Titan booth, which is 5537. And this is really important. Our booth is a wall-side booth.
Oh,
so
yeah.
if you try to find row 5500, you'll be swimming in the harbour. What you need to do is walk in to door C, which is at the beginning of row 2200, and immediately on your left, that is where our booth is. Paradoxically, is 5537, which I think that we tried for 20 years to get Comic-Con to change the numbering of, because nobody can ever find where we are. So that's where we are. Walk into door C, we're immediately on your left. You can't miss the floor-to-ceiling banner. But we've got some great hard-boiled, hard-case crime product, novels and graphic novels
Great.
by Max for him to sign. And we've got these great mystery art cards, and you can take a look at the books here. And I'm telling you, they are fucking awesome. They're brilliant. And I think it's the thing we produced this year that I'm proudest of. Nick, who's our publisher and owner here, has to be proud of everything. But it's great work. It's such a privilege and such a pleasure to be involved with bringing this back in and onto the shelves.
You can say what you want, but you still have to pay me.
Okay.
Not much.
Not much. So thank you very much, everybody. Hopefully we'll see you tomorrow. The book is on sale in One Mean Money is on sale in September, and we have the art cards which Max will be signing tomorrow at 11 o'clock at our difficult-to-find booth that hopefully I've explained how to find.
That's door C, not Dorsey, which is something in England, I think.
Yeah, right. Well, there's always Tommy Dorsey.
Yeah, that's always right. That's American.
Yeah, great soundtrack of this material.
Thank you, sir.
One more time. Max Allan Collins, come on.
Thank you very much.